Chapter 38. Even in the colorless gray, the knives and whatever the hell those prong things were reflected in the white candlelight. Kelin never imagined that light could still reflect here, or that it could make those blades look so very sharp. Not again. His head rolled around on the back of the steel table to which they had tied him. He didn't know how long he'd been there. Time was impossible to guess in this constant gloaming. The room was small, plain with gray walls and a high window with blinding light coming through it. He closed his eyes. Can't be tortured again. This isn't real. This cannot be real. The Kemen aren't real. This was all Dare's fault. Not again. A whimper squeezed through his lips as the door creaked open. He prayed, wished, hoped that the Kemen who entered was Thistle. He'd saved them before. It didn't matter if he'd told the other Kemen they'd come to Dark Rain. He'd saved them before. I remember you, the Storm Reader chuckled. You and your friend are still alive. How unexpected. Who are you? Kelin tried not to shiver. Don't you know your history? I am Vlad. Kelin closed his eyes. He had recently learned the name, but a name from over 2,000 years ago seemed so removed. But what are you doing here? Vlad continued in an almost sing-song voice. He brushed his fingers over some of the blades on the table beside Kelin. I was told you made it through a whole minute last time, but that may have only been because there was so much meat to cut through. The human watched the Kemen pick up a scalpel. Will it be more or less this time? Kelin stared hard at the ceiling, avoiding the Kemen's gaze. Vlad snickered. Of course, now you must pay for your crime of spilling Kemen blood. We'll take our time getting to that, though. There's no rush here. Kelin gulped. The Kemen paused, and then a wide, vicious smile anchored his features. He twirled the scalpel between his fingers. Let us begin. Kelin kicked against his bindings and squirmed as far away as he could. Even his lung twinged at the memory of last time. He didn't want to scream, to break down, but he heard his body yelling on its own. Tears squeezed from the corners of his eyes. Thistle sold us out! A sob broke through his voice. I thought he was on our side, but he wasn't. He is... The blade hung between Vlad's fingers, and Kelin stared at it hovering over his eye. The Storm Reader leaned in. He is what? He is Kemen! Kelin screamed, as a sob erupted from deep in his chest. Good. Vlad's breath hammered against his ear. More. He heaved against his bindings. They shouldn't have been caught. Not like this. He inhaled, but suddenly found himself calm. He was riding the storm. He could see his fear as lightning, his memories of last time as electric clouds that were lashing out inside the tempest. But he was at peace in the center. He heard himself yelling, but it was as if someone else were doing it. He's the Kemen who helped us! I thought we could trust him, but he's a Kemen! Vlad closed his eyes and inhaled with a small smile. He pressed the knife against the young man's skin and ripped. Kelin yelped, even though he felt no pain at first. Then the laceration began to burn. In that white-hot instant, he remembered every gruesome detail of the last time, every horrible, heart-pounding, agony-laden moment. And it simply passed him by. Do they have an army? The Kemen smiled as he dipped the knife below Kelin's skin again. The knife hurt, and he felt it, but he found himself laughing at such a little cut. He knew he'd have lines to say, a part to play if he wanted to escape. He gasped, No! Yes! Silver Dawn is on the way, but they're not there yet, and they're gathering the elves who will fight, but no, they don't! Just a handful of soldiers. Where is the princeling? The tip of the blade rested against Kelin's arm. I think there's a nerve here. He pressed it down, but didn't break the skin. Kelin licked his lips so he could speak. Hello. He squeezed the air past his throat. Elwyn! Some place called Moonrise Castle with the Baroness and both princes. Kelin watched Vlade's eyes glow. Both princes. And the elven witch. He chuckled and withdrew the scalpel. Smiling, he dropped the blade and snapped his fingers. Another Kemen materialized. She was the first female Kemen Kelin had ever seen outside of combat, but he didn't bother with the fact. She had the same haircut and the same clothes, but a more aquiline face. He was sure she had the same eyes, although they looked grey here. Vlade grinned at her. Send him back to his cell since he's been such a good dog. Dare paced in tight circles. Their square prison had 3 stone sides and a wall of bars. Beyond them seemed to be a corridor, but she had no idea where it went. They'd had their heads covered with hoods when they'd arrived. She scowled. Why was Kelin taken? It should have been me. He hadn't wanted to come. And why is everything gray here? She blinked her eyes almost constantly, hoping to suddenly see color instead of this aberrant grayness. She could not get used to it. We knew the danger. Jacob folded his arms and remained in his corner. He didn't look any smaller without his armor, but its loss had shattered his illusion of invincibility. Dare slammed a boot against the bars. Ugh! She stomped to the back of the cell, spun on her heel, and returned. Where's Thistle? Venan rolled his eyes. Oh, please, human. He's one of them. I cannot believe he convinced us and that we listened. He rested his forehead on the bars. We made the same mistake again, even though he doesn't have that sword. But what if he did it for Thalin's sake? She whispered. Then he has killed all of us for the boy. Jacob raised his hands. All right, that's enough, both of you. Dare shook her head at Venan. But Thistle saved our lives. Not this time, girl, he hissed. Don't you understand? There are no Kemen traitors. The knight called. I heard myself give an order. Venan clicked his mouth closed. She hunched her shoulders. Yes, sir. Footsteps crunched down the corridor. Dare hopped up and craned her neck, but still could see nothing. Kelin came into focus. A Kemen soldier pushed him forward. Despite the blood on his arm, he held his head high. She sighed with relief. The guard stopped in front of the door, and she pointed to the back of the cell. The prisoner shuffled to the far wall. The Kemen shoved Kelin past the bars and relocked the door. The human collapsed. Dare slipped forward. How bad? He raised his arm. Worst of it? He turned his face away. I'm so sorry, he gasped. I told them where the princes were. Dare paused but didn't speak. She glanced at Jacob, who shrugged. Venan, shaking his head, stepped up to the door and ran his fingers over it. Can't pick this lock without tools. You know how to pick locks? Dare blurted. The elf nodded. I wasn't always the good soldier. She strained to see into the corridor. Well, at least there aren't guards just standing there. Jacob rolled his eyes. The Kemen aren't that obvious. You can wager they're spying on us somehow. He looked past the bars and through a thin window at the base of the ceiling. It'll be nightfall soon.